Oh no. Huh. So apparently I haven't been live. Well, I guess it was showing me that I was live, and apparently I wasn't live. So we're going to start all over. I just went through the whole presentation, and nobody could see it, I think. But here we are anyway. So I know it's a holiday weekend or holiday day here in the U.S., and it's a special day for me too. That's because it is the 5th anniversary of Tales of Wonder and Dread. 5 years ago today, I published the first books from Tales of Wonder and Dread. They were Spooky Rockford, Lifeblood, and Strange Realities, which was sort of a new version of my collection of short stories. And since then, I've published a lot of books. I don't know exactly how many, but and for a while, every year I was doing. At least the last few years, I did 3 books on the 3rd anniversary, 4 books last year on the 4th anniversary, and this year I published 5 books. Big mistake, a lot of work to do, and don't expect 6 books next year on this date. It's not going to happen. So we're going to look a little bit at each one of these books. And I just dropped several of them. All right, so we've got Spooky State Line 2, more creepy tales from the Illinois-Wisconsin border area. As you might guess from the 2, this is the 2nd in a series. Now, it's actually sort of the 4th in a series, because the first Spooky State Line was kind of a sequel to Spooky Rockford and Spooky Rockford 2. When I got to doing Spooky State Line, I realized there probably weren't enough stories actually in Rockford itself, but there were still plenty in other parts of the area. And so I decided to do Spooky State Line. Well, there was still enough stuff for Spooky State Line 2. There's enough that I'm going to do a Spooky State Line 3 as well, but I expanded the area a little bit this time around. Previously, I didn't do anything in the Chicago suburbs. And part of that was that I was doing Spooky Berwyn, which we'll get to that in a minute. But Spooky Berwyn was based in the Chicago suburbs. But I decided this time around, a lot of the people who have Spooky Berwyn and Spooky Berwyn 2 probably don't also have this book, or the first any of the Spooky Rockfords or Spooky State Lines, and vice versa. So I thought, well, I'll reprint a few of the Spooky Berwyn and Spooky Berwyn 2 stories in here, sort of the nearer suburbs. I also expanded out into Iowa, Dubuque, Iowa. I basically went any place that's within 100 miles, I figure is sort of fair game here. Now, the previous books have all had both nonfiction and fiction. This book does not have any fiction. Also, the previous books have had things from other contributors. This one does not. This is strictly my stuff. And neither one of those things were intentional. I just didn't get any fiction that was based in the area, nor did I get any contributions from others here. So I'm just going to do a quick rundown of the stories in this book. Again, they're all by me. We've got a haunted landmark in DeKalb, Illinois, the Egyptian Theater, the history and ghosts of Starved Rock State Park, the witches of Whitewater, why is Whitewater called Second Salem, is there an unsettled spirit near Rockford's Guilford Union Cemetery, a Madison building has gangster history and ghosts, Lincoln Tallman Museum, do spirits haunt an historic home turned museum in Janesville, Wisconsin, Munger Road, a classic haunted train crossing legend, a Beloit Union Hall is said to be haunted by years of other uses, Dubuque's Fisher Building, Iowa's first modern office building, hosts 2 spirits, the spirits of forgotten dead are said to haunt a hill on the UW-Madison campus. The Oscar Taylor House, a Freeport museum, is said to be haunted. Is it a ghost or a vampire? What lurks around Spring Valley's Massac Mausoleum? Is Bloody Mary buried in the State Line area? Dubuque, Iowa's Grand Opera House has a rich history and ghosts. Broadhead Manor, a haunted multi-use facility in Broadhead, Wisconsin, is transformed into a haunted attraction during spooky season. Galena's MB Eatery, come for the food and drink, stay for the spirits. Colonel Palmer House, do children still haunt this old home? A Phantom Canary, unexplained bird sounds in a Beloit Senior Center. Aztalan Park's Ghosts of the Distant Past. Evansville, Wisconsin's Weary Road is said to be very spooky and perhaps haunted. A Madison Park with a dark history is said to be haunted. Is Dubuque, Iowa's old jail building still haunted? Burlington, Wisconsin, 2 spooky cemeteries in one trip. Elgin Casket Company, a haunted attraction. Dubuque's Hotel Julian is Iowa's oldest hotel and just maybe its most haunted. Visit St. Killian's Cemetery in Lake Geneva if you dare. Otto's Place, a Galena eatery with a watchful spirit. George Stickney House, a different angle on a haunted house tale. Does a former resident still haunt the Elwood House Museum in DeKalb? A woman in a wedding dress is said to linger in one of the state's most haunted houses. Opera, Orson Welles and Elvira, the Woodstock Opera House is said to be one of the nation's most haunted. Galena's Ryan Mansion, a haunted historic destination. Rockford's Graham Ginestra House, 2 families are thought to haunt the Home Turn Museum. And Raven's Grin Inn, a spooky attraction with a real ghost. So, that is Spooky State Line 2. And next up, we're going to talk about Spooky Space. Spooky Space, Creepy Otherworldly Tales. And this came about because there was someone who did a bit of a treatise on why there can't be horror in space, which is an absolutely ludicrous idea if you think about Alien, Event Horizon. I'm sure there are lots of others. But I decided I wanted to do a book with at least spooky, although not all these I would qualify as necessarily horror, but spooky stories in space or related to space. And so we've got 2 stories from me. The Stars, which has been previously published, and that's sort of a Lovecraft meets space take. And then Prelude to War, which is a brand new story, which I got the bright idea to link together H.P. Lovecraft's Color Out of Space with H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, and create basically a prologue that is a prologue to both of them. And I'm kind of happy with the way the story turned out. Well, we've got The Dead Planet by E. Eggert. Now, she's contributed before to my books, and this is kind of a cool science fiction story, but it does have a monster, so I think it fit. Blood from Another Planet is by Dustin Ernest, and I absolutely love this story. I've published it before, at least once, maybe a couple times. But I asked him for permission to republish it here because I just love that story and it fits. Terrors of a Tin Can Ape is by Elizabeth Lynn Blackson, who is a good friend of mine and a frequent contributor at Tales of Wonder and Dread. And I've published the first 2 books in her trilogy of novels. The 3rd one's coming out later this year. So we've got that from her, and she's in several of these other books. And The Color Out of Space by H.P. Lovecraft I managed to include. As I said, the one story of mine is sort of a prologue to it. So I felt it was appropriate. I suppose I could have put War of the Worlds in here, but I thought it would have dominated the whole book, so I didn't do that. Next up, we have Spooky Berwyn 3. Now, a little bit about why these are called Spooky Berwyn. These are creepy tales from the Chicago area, and this one's even more creepy tales from the Chicago area. So why do I call it Berwyn? Well, Berwyn is a suburb of Chicago. But more importantly, I am a huge fan of Svengoolie. Svengoolie is a show on MeTV, but it's named for the horror host Svengoolie, who was played brilliantly by Rich Coase, and he writes it, and I managed to meet him. He's an all-around nice guy, and we watch every Saturday night. It's just sort of our ritual, part of our Saturday evening. And so I wanted to pay tribute to him by titling the Chicago area books, Spooky Berwyn. So it doesn't make sense maybe if you're looking for stories about Berwyn. The first book does include some, but it makes sense when you understand they're an homage to Mr. Coase and his horror host persona. This book, the previous books all had fiction. This one does not. It's all nonfiction. Previous books were both nonfiction and fiction. This one features mainly stuff from myself, but there's one piece from my lovely wife Diane Hill and one from a gentleman named Gary Reefer. So I'll go over the titles in this book. Oh, I want to add too. These books, I tend to include pictures. I've included pictures in all of these. A lot of times they come from like Wikimedia Commons and things, if I can find pictures like that, or sometimes they're pictures I take. But in the case of this one, I was fortunate enough, I put out a request on Facebook, and Dale Kaczmarek was kind enough to let me use some of his photos in these books. This is the one over here. And so I really wanted to thank Dale for letting me use these pictures. He'd shot quite a few of these locations. So thank you very much, Dale, for letting me use the pictures. Here's the rundown of what's in this book. Chicago's Congress Plaza Hotel, considered one of America's most haunted hotels. Does a phantom train run on Elmhurst tracks? A visit to Chicago's James M. Niederlander Theater in the Alley of Death. You can have your wedding or other event at a haunted location, Joliet's Patrick C. Haley Mansion. Are ghostly sightings near the site of the old Fort Dearborn Chicago's oldest haunting? According to some, Cicero's Morton College really does have a college spirit. Do you believe it? They say Chicago's Liars Club is haunted. Antioch, Illinois, a haunted village halfway between Chicago and Milwaukee. A remnant of pre-Chicago fire, the old water tower is said to be haunted. While you probably won't find Jason Voorhees lurking, a visit to Mount Tabor Cemetery in Crystal Lake, Illinois, might yield paranormal experiences. Lincoln Park Zoo, lions and tigers and ghosts, oh my. An artist's loft building in Waukegan is said to be home to restless spirits. Does a Polish pianist haunt a Chicago museum? At least 4 ghosts are said to haunt Chicago's Drake Hotel. Ox Sable Cemetery, Manuka Burial Ground, is said to have a mischievous ghost and maybe a portal. Has a ship disaster from 1915 imprinted itself on the area around the Clark Street Bridge. The former headquarters of Harpo Studios was said to be one of the most haunted locations in Chicago. Excuse me. An Axeman and others are said to haunt Old Post Road in Crete, Illinois. Chicago institution Simon's Tavern, a Swedish bar with a haunted reputation. Shoe Factory Road, a haunted road connects 2 towns. The Glessner House, a Gilded Age home turned into a museum. Or is that haunted museum? Aurora's Mount Olivet Cemetery, where not all the dead are resting. Another haunted theater, meet Chicago's Congress Theater. Streeter's Moon Point Cemetery is considered one of Illinois' most haunted. Now those are my stories. I mentioned my wife, Diane, has a story in here. It's Clark Street's Ghosts of St. Valentine's Day. And Gary Reefer's story is a story about his home with some photos taken by his lovely wife. The Coal Miner's Cottage Spirits is the story by Gary, and like I said, it has pictures from his wife. And so that is Spooky Berwyn 3. Next up, we have Spooky and Weird. And this is a collection of weird fiction and poetry. And in this book, we've got poetry. I mentioned poetry. I've got 5 Lovecraftian haikus in here. One of them is Warren is Dead. Cthulhu Fatagan, I never know how to pronounce that. Exum Priory, Innsmouth, and Space Color. So those are all Lovecraftian haikus, which gets us the poetry side of the equation here. And we've got a couple stories from me in here. The Halloween Intervention, or Halloween Cthulhu and Blood Drinkers Oh My, which was previously published in Horrifying Halloween, and the debut tour, which I've previously published in several, but they're both very Lovecraftian tales. We've got Exponential by Heath D. Alberts. Sorry, buddy. He's one of my good friends, and he has contributed to quite a few books, and I've published this one before. I don't remember which. Oh, I think it was in No More New Year's. I was published before. And then we've got newcomer to my stuff anyway, M.K. Davis. Now, M.K. gave us a story here called The Dragon Slayer, which is actually pretty interesting. It's a very humorous twist on the whole Dragon Slayer legend and trope, I guess you would say. We've also got another newcomer to this, Dan Klefstad. Dan, to many, is probably known as the guy who was the voice of the morning in DeKalb on WNIJ. He recently retired from that, but he also wrote the brilliant vampire novel Fiona's Guardians, which he's working on a sequel. This story that he submitted, called Not Dead Enough, that I'm running here, is actually sort of a sequel to Fiona's Guardians, and I believe he said it's going to be incorporated into the book as a chapter. So you get sort of a preview with this book, with that story. And Dan's a good guy and a good writer who's definitely building quite a reputation. We've got also another frequent contributor is R.C. Mulhare, who gave us Source of Ignition Unknown. Now, her story and Heath's story both build on the very Lovecraftian weird fiction trope of an ancient book which has some sort of real danger to it, and they're both built on that, which is pretty cool. Now, another frequent contributor of mine, who I mentioned before in Spooky Space, is Elizabeth Lynn Blackson, and she's got several stories in here. She's got On Account of Murder, Canopsia, The Huskarls of Njordr, which I'm sure I mangled that pronunciation, and The Dreams in Which I'm Dying. So that is Spooky and Weird, a collection of weird fiction and poetry. Finally, we've got the book that shares its title with the publishing imprint, Tales of Wonder and Dread, a collection of science fiction and horror tales. Now, when I started Tales of Wonder and Dread, the name is built on science fiction, wonder, and horror, dread. So I wanted to do a collection that includes an equal amount of both horror and science fiction, and that's what I've done here. We've got quite a few contributors. This is it's a very thick book. 282 pages, so it's the biggest book of the bunch here. Under the science fiction side, we've got, I'm just going to do these in order, although we've got some repeat visitors. We've got The Wind, which is my own story. I think that's only ever been printed once before. We've got Know It All by Heath D. Alberts, again, good friend and great writer. And that one I published once before. I think, though, it was in Dark Dreams and Weird Worlds, which was a book before I started Tales of Wonder and Dread. And it was sort of that collection sort of gave me the idea for doing Tales of Wonder and Dread. And we have The Stars, which is another of mine, which was in Spooky Space also. A Time to Die is by Frank Kaufman. Now, Frank has his own publishing company, too, called Mind's Eye Publications, or Publishing. I can't remember how it's finished, but Frank was an English professor for many, many years, and he's retired, and from that, he's still heavily busy writing, and he was kind enough to contribute this story. And it's actually the first printing of it is in this book. He's got it coming out in a book later, I think later this year or early next year, but for now it's the first printing. Next is Rest in Peace, Jeremy Crandall, which is my book, or my story, and it's been published a few places in the past. The Dead Planet is by E. Eggert, which that was also in Spooky Space. The Quest of Alice is mine. That one has been in Not Your Parents' Fairy Tales, which it's kind of a story that's a variant on Pinocchio, but a science fiction meets horror variant on it. My story Altered Reality is also here. Prelude to War, which I mentioned in Spooky Space. The Battery Man by Heath D. Alberts is again here. I've published that one before too. Grief, which is my story, that was published in my time travel collection that I did a couple of years ago. But other than that, I don't think it's been published before. That brings us to the dread horror side of things. All My Demons Come Round is by Elizabeth Lynn Blackson again, and so she's contributed both sides of this book. 300 Feet Under Allenville is by David W. Pedersen. Now, David is very much into literature, and he's very much a literary kind of guy, and so much so that he runs a bookstore in Rockford, Illinois, called Maze Books. And Maze is just a wonderful place. They have used in new books, and just such a unique, eclectic selection of books. And Dave and his wife are just great people, and you can tell how much they love books by going in there. Now, you cannot go in there today. They are currently moving from their first location to their new location. They're going to be opening early October. I think October 6th is what their date is for opening. I'm wondering if they'll do a soft reopening before then. But once they do open up, if you're in the Rockford area, by all means, stop into Maze. Maze is just good people, great selection. If you love books, you got to go to Maze. Next, we've got my story, A Visit with Grandmother, which is also in Not Your Parents' Fairy Tales, which it's sort of a combination of Little Red Riding Hood, werewolf lore, and The Willows by Algernon Blackwood. And that was like actually an early weird fiction piece. So I sort of combined them all in that tale. The Weight of a Feather is by Elizabeth Lynn Blackson. What We Give is by M.K. Davis, who was also in Spooky and Weird. This one is sort of a variant on Moby Dick, and it's a really interesting story. The Rooms Have You Now is by Eric Danhoff, who has contributed in the past to other Tales of Wonder and Dread books. The Passage is another one of mine, which I think has only previously been published in Lifeblood 2. Bodies of Rot is another by Elizabeth Lynn Blackson. The Beast is from a new Tales of Wonder and Dread contributor, Patrick J. Murphy III. Eat, Sleep, Snack, Repeat is by Adam R. Crump, and Adam has been in several of my books before. A little note about that, you'll notice that the spellings in the story are different. Adam is from New Zealand, and as such, he uses New Zealand spellings in terms of phrases, and I left those in place, so they're going to be seen perhaps a little out of sync with the rest of the book, but I figure that ties into the author's voice, and it's literally part of his culture, so I thought it needed to be kept the way it was. So if you ever wonder why there are variant spellings between the two, between that story and the rest of the stories here, that's why. I thought it was very important to leave that stuff intact and not Americanize it. And finally, we have another story from Elizabeth Lynn Blackson, The Smell. So that is Tales of Wonder and Dread. Now, you can get all of these books at lulu.com/spotlight/strange sound. Or, if you type in talesofwonderanddread.com, it will take you to a section of GaryHillAuthor.com that has all the Tales of Wonder and Dread stuff in it. It's a subdomain. And if you go to just GaryHillAuthor.com, you can also get to the Tales of Wonder and Dread stuff and all kinds of other things. Pretty much everything I do is all interconnected at GaryHillAuthor.com. So those are the places you can go. Again, these are the 5 books that came out today. Yeah, pretty massive taken as such. But you can get them today. I want to thank you all for taking a little time out of your day to watch this. This video will go up at Spooky Ventures YouTube channel on Saturday as a spooky feature, and it'll be on the Facebook page pretty much permanently. So again, especially for those in the United States, thanks for taking a little bit time out of your holiday to tune in. And I hope I haven't bored you to death. But thanks for joining in and celebrating 5 years of Tales of Wonder and Dread. Spooky Ventures is the home for spooky content and spooky merchandise on the web. Check it out today at spookyventures.com. And remember, always keep it spooky.